The silence in the boardroom was so heavy it felt like it had physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders as I sat at the far end of the polished mahogany table. Evelyn was standing at the head of the room, her hand still frozen in midair, gesturing toward the massive 80-inch screen that displayed the final slide of her masterpiece presentation. She was smiling, that sharp, predatory smile she always wore when she thought she'd finally won, the one that never quite reached her eyes. But her eyes hadn't moved to the screen yet. She was looking directly at the CEO, Mr. Sterling, waiting for the standing ovation she was certain was coming. Instead, there was only the sound of Mr. Sterling's heavy fountain pen hitting the table with a dull, final thud. I could see the reflection of the screen in the high-gloss surface of the table. It wasn't the projected revenue growth she thought she was showing. It was a scrolling log of every document she had ever deleted from my shared drive, a time-stamped record of every midnight edit she'd made to my files to make them look like failures, and a series of private messages where she'd referred to the entire board as clueless fossils. The air conditioning hummed, a low, mechanical drone that seemed to amplify the frantic thudding in my ears. I felt a strange, cold clarity wash over me. This was the moment the floor would finally open up beneath her, and for the first time in 5 long years, I wasn't the one who was going to fall. But to understand how we got to this moment, we have to go back. Before we continue the story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications for more videos like this. It began on a Tuesday, a day that seemed entirely unremarkable until the moment the glass doors of the executive's suite swung open. I remember the smell of her perfume, something expensive, floral, and suffocating long before she actually spoke. Evelyn had been my boss for 3 years at that point, and I had learned to read the rhythm of her footsteps. When they were quick and sharp, it meant she was looking for a scapegoat. When they were slow and rhythmic, it meant she had already found one. That morning, she walked straight to my desk, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how the quarterly report was coming. She simply dropped a thick, leather-bound folder onto my keyboard, nearly crushing my fingers. "The Avery account," she said, her voice like sandpaper wrapped in silk. "I've decided I'm taking lead on the presentation. You'll be my support. I need all your research, all your drafts, and your login credentials for the design server by noon." I looked up at her, my heart sinking. I had spent 6 months on the Avery account. I had stayed late every night, missing dinners with my family, missing my sister's engagement party, all to ensure this pitch was perfect. It was supposed to be my promotion piece. I tried to speak, to say that the strategy was built on a proprietary model I had developed, but she just leaned over my desk, her face inches from mine. "Don't be difficult, Maya," she whispered, a thin smile playing on her lips. "We both know you're better in the shadows. You're the engine, I'm the driver. Engines don't get to take credit for the destination." She walked away without waiting for an answer, leaving me sitting there in the cold light of the office, feeling my own hard work being stripped away like skin. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just sat there, my hands trembling slightly as I looked at the folder. She thought my silence was a sign of defeat. She thought that because I didn't fight back in the way she understood, with loud words and public confrontations, that I was simply accepting my role as her stepping stone. But as I watched her retreat into her corner office, I realized something. If I was the engine, then I was the only one who knew how to make this machine run, and I was the only one who knew how to make it stop. I want you to take a moment and really think about the environment you're in right now. Maybe you're driving home after a long shift, or maybe you're sitting in your own office, looking at a boss who looks a lot like Evelyn. You know the type, the person who uses your kindness as a map for their next conquest, who mistakes your professionalism for a lack of backbone. We're taught from a young age that if we work hard and keep our heads down, the world will eventually reward us. But in the corporate world, sometimes keeping your head down just makes it easier for someone to step on your neck. I spent years believing that my merit would speak for itself. I believed that the late nights and the flawless spreadsheets would eventually be seen by the people who mattered. But Evelyn had spent those same years building a wall between me and the leadership, a wall made of my own successes that she claimed as her own. She was a master of the we that really meant I, and the I that really meant you failed. As you listen to this, I want you to understand that I wasn't born with the coldness I eventually had to develop. I was the person who brought cookies to the office on birthdays. I was the one who volunteered to cover the holiday shifts so others could be with their kids. I was too sensitive, according to my annual reviews, a phrase she used to keep me from ever asking for a raise. But sensitivity is just another word for observation. And while she was busy looking for the next mirror to admire herself in, I was observing everything. I was learning her passwords, her habits, her fears, and her absolute, staggering incompetence when it came to the actual work we did. She was a ghost in the machine, and she had forgotten that ghosts don't have any power once you turn on the lights. So, settle in. This isn't a story about a sudden explosion. It's a story about a slow, deliberate reconstruction of a power dynamic that everyone thought was set in stone. What Evelyn didn't know, what she never bothered to learn because she viewed me as a mere utility, was my background before I joined the marketing firm. She saw a senior strategist with a knack for numbers. She didn't see the woman who had spent 4 years in systems architecture and data security before pivoting to marketing. To her, the company's internal server was just a magic folder where files appeared. To me, it was a living, breathing ecosystem of metadata. Every time a file is opened, every time a cell in a spreadsheet is changed, every time a document is printed or deleted, it leaves a digital fingerprint. This was my hidden advantage. For years, I had watched her take my work, rename the files, and delete the originals from our shared drive so I couldn't prove I was the author. She thought that once a file was in the trash and the trash was emptied, it was gone forever. She didn't realize that I had been the one to set up the firm's shadow backup protocol 3 years prior during the IT transition. I had created a mirrored drive that logged every transaction on the creative server, not for the company, but for my own peace of mind. I called it the library. It wasn't just a backup of the work, it was a backup of the betrayal. It contained every version of every project, showing the progression of my ideas and the exact moment she would log in, change the author name to E. Vance, and erase my traces. I stayed silent because I knew that a single accusation without proof would be career suicide. She was a favorite of the board. She played golf with the CEO's wife. To take her down, I didn't need a complaint. I needed a mountain of data so high that no amount of charm could climb over it. I had the keys to the kingdom, and she was still trying to pick the lock with a bobby pin. My silence wasn't acceptance. It was the quiet hum of a server recording her every move. The pattern of her sabotage was as predictable as the tides, but far more destructive. It started small, back when I was just a junior analyst. I remember a specific instance involving the Miller campaign. I had stayed up until 3 a.m. perfecting the demographic targeting. I had found a niche market that everyone else had overlooked. During the morning meeting, I started to present my findings. I hadn't even reached the second slide when Evelyn interrupted me. Maya, honey, I think you're getting a bit ahead of yourself, she said, her voice dripping with condescending motherliness. I reviewed your notes this morning and realized they were a bit, let's say, immature for a client of this caliber. I took the liberty of refining them into a more professional strategy. She then proceeded to read my own notes, word for word, from a printed sheet she had hidden under her notepad. The partners nodded in a result-oriented trance, praising her visionary approach. I sat there, my face burning, looking down at my own laptop, which was still displaying the very words she was speaking. When the meeting ended, she pulled me aside and told me that she had done me a favor. "You're not ready for the spotlight yet," she said. "If you had presented that and failed, your career would be over. I'm protecting you." That was her favorite weapon, the protection of her own theft. She did it with the Lakeside project, where she told the client I was away on personal leave when they asked for the lead strategist, even though I was sitting 10 feet away in a cubicle. She did it with the Vanguard merger, where she deleted my entire risk assessment report an hour before the meeting, then blamed me for the technical glitch that forced her to improvise using her own stolen notes. She created a narrative where I was brilliant but unstable, creative but unreliable. She was the steady hand that guided my wild ideas into something profitable. As the months turned into years, the weight of her constant gaslighting began to take a toll on my health. I started having migraines that felt like a hot needle behind my eyes. I would sit in my car for 20 minutes every morning before walking into the building, just to steady my breathing. I watched her get promoted to vice president on the back of a project I had conceptualized in my hospital bed while recovering from a minor surgery. I remember seeing the announcement on the company intranet, a photo of her holding a glass of champagne, smiling that same hollow smile. The caption read, "Evelyn Vance, the visionary leading us into the future." I was mentioned in the final paragraph as part of the supporting team. It wasn't just the theft of the work, it was the theft of time. I was working 80-hour weeks to cover for her lack of technical knowledge. I was the one who fixed her broken formulas in Excel, the one who redesigned her botched graphics, and the one who stayed behind to answer the client emails she ignored. She would spend her afternoons at networking lunches that lasted 4 hours, while I ate a stale granola bar at my desk, trying to meet the deadlines she had set. She knew I wouldn't leave. I had a mortgage, I was supporting my aging parents, and she had successfully poisoned the well with other departments, making them believe I was difficult to work with. She had built a cage out of my own necessity, and she spent every day rattling the bars just to remind me she had the key. I began to realize that she didn't just want my work, she wanted my spirit. She wanted to see if she could break me to the point where I would stop even trying to be credited. She wanted a ghost who could think, a shadow that could produce. One afternoon, about a year ago, I found myself in the break room, staring at the coffee machine. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't even hold the sugar packet. Evelyn walked in, looking radiant in a cream-colored power suit. She looked at me, her eyes scanning my tired face, my unbrushed hair, and the dark circles under my eyes. She didn't offer a kind word. Instead, she laughed, a soft, tinkling sound that made my skin crawl. "Maya, you really need to take better care of yourself," she said, stirring her tea. "You're looking a bit frayed. If I didn't know better, I'd say the work is getting to you. But we both know you're just sensitive, right? Maybe you should take a few days off. I can have Sarah handle your current workload. She's young, but she's very eager. She doesn't seem to get as overwhelmed as you do." It was a threat, plain and simple. Sarah was a new intern who Evelyn was already grooming to be my replacement, someone cheaper, someone who hadn't yet realized that Evelyn was a parasite. That was the moment something inside me finally snapped. It wasn't a loud break. It was a quiet, cold realization. I realized that as long as I played by the rules of professionalism and patience, I would always lose, because Evelyn didn't believe in rules. She believed in power. And she believed that my silence was a sign that I was afraid of her. In that break room, as I watched the steam rise from her tea, I decided that I was going to stop being the engine that drove her career. I was going to become the architect of her exit. I smiled back at her, the first real smile I'd given her in months. "You're right, Evelyn," I said, my voice steady. "I do need to take care of myself. I think I'll start focusing on making sure everything is properly documented. For the sake of the company, of course." She just nodded, missing the edge in my voice, thinking she had finally broken my will. The shift in my mindset changed everything. I stopped seeing myself as a victim and started seeing myself as an investigator. I began the preparation phase, which lasted 6 months. Every morning, I would arrive an hour before everyone else. I wasn't working on the Avery account or the quarterly projections, at least, not at first. I was busy refining the library. I created a script that automatically captured a screenshot of my desktop every 5 minutes and uploaded it to a private, encrypted cloud server. I also began to leave breadcrumbs in my work. In the complex financial models I built for her, I started hiding small, non-critical errors in the deep layers of the spreadsheets, errors that only I knew how to fix, and that would only trigger if the file was copied and renamed by a different user. I was tagging my work like a biologist tags a shark. I also began to be much more helpful to Evelyn. When she asked for my login credentials for the server, I didn't just give them to her. I gave her a specific set of credentials that had administrative logging enabled. This meant that every single click she made, every file she opened, and every word she typed while logged in as me was recorded in a text file that she couldn't see. I watched from my own terminal as she spent her evenings going through my personal folders, looking for something to use against me. She found a folder labeled Personal Grievances, which I had purposely filled with fake, overly emotional drafts of resignation letters that made me look weak and defeated. She loved them. I could see her opening that folder almost every day, probably gloating over how close I was to breaking. What she didn't see was the folder hidden inside the system's root directory, labeled System Architecture Backups, which contained the real evidence, the side-by-side comparisons of my original work and her refined versions. Evelyn's confidence grew as she thought she was tightening the noose around my neck. She became even more brazen. She started taking credit for things she hadn't even read. I remember a meeting with a major tech client where she presented a slide deck I had finished only 10 minutes prior. I had purposely included a slide with a very specific, very complex chart about consumer inertia. During the meeting, the client asked a highly technical question about the data source for that chart. Evelyn didn't even blink. "Oh, that's a proprietary algorithm I developed over the weekend," she lied, her voice brimming with false authority. I found that the standard metrics were failing to capture the nuance of the current market. I sat there, nodding, while the client looked impressed. What she didn't know was that the chart was based on completely fabricated data. It was a visual representation of the Fibonacci sequence applied to the company's coffee consumption. It had nothing to do with marketing. If she had actually looked at the data source, she would have seen the joke. But she didn't look. She never looked. She just took the credit and moved on. I began to realize that her greatest weakness was her own arrogance. She truly believed she was smarter than everyone in the room, and that belief made her blind. I started feeding her more of these ego traps. I would leave printouts of advanced strategies on my desk, knowing she would sneak in and take them after I left. These strategies were always slightly flawed, just enough to be embarrassing if anyone with actual knowledge looked at them, but shiny enough to appeal to her desire for disruptive ideas. She was building her reputation on a foundation of sand, and I was the one controlling the tide. By the 5th month of my preparation, I had a digital dossier that was nearly 40 gigabytes in size. It contained video screen captures of her deleting my work, audio recordings of her gaslighting me in her office, which I had legally recorded under our state's one-party consent laws during our private meetings, and a complete log of her misappropriating company funds for personal networking expenses that were actually spa days and luxury shopping trips. I had found out that she was billing the company for client dinners that were actually dinners with her college friends, and she was using the company car service to pick up her dry cleaning and drop off her kids at private school. She thought she was untouchable. She thought the rules were for people like me, the engines. I felt a strange sense of detachment as I organized the final files. I didn't hate her anymore. Hate is an exhausting emotion that requires a connection to the person. I had severed that connection. To me, she was just a bug in the system that needed to be patched. I waited for the right opportunity, the perfect storm, where her arrogance would meet a platform she couldn't control. That opportunity arrived in the form of the decade strategy pitch. This was the most important meeting in the company's history. The board was looking for a 10-year plan to take the firm global. The presenter wouldn't just be getting a promotion, they would be getting a seat on the board and a significant equity stake. Evelyn, of course, demanded that I do all the work while she took the lead. She told me to have the final presentation ready by Friday morning, but she wanted the master file on her private drive by Thursday night so she could add her final touches. The trigger was pulled on a Thursday afternoon, exactly 3 hours before my deadline. Evelyn called me into her office. She looked stressed, her usual composure cracking under the pressure of the upcoming board meeting. "Maya," she said, not looking up from her phone, "I've decided that you won't be attending the board meeting tomorrow. It's a closed-door session, and frankly, I think your presence might be a bit distracting. You have a tendency to get defensive when people ask questions about your data. I'll handle the Q&A." This was it. This was her final move to erase me completely from the company's biggest success. She was planning to walk into that room, present my 10-year vision, and then fire me on Monday morning. I knew it, and she knew I knew it. "I understand, Evelyn," I said, my voice barely a whisper. I made sure to look like I was on the verge of tears. I even let my lip tremble a little. "I'll put the final file in your private folder by 6 p.m. She finally looked up, a look of pure, predatory triumph in her eyes. "Good girl," she said. "You've really matured, Maya. I'll make sure to mention your hard work in the footnotes." As soon as I left her office, I went to my desk and opened the master file. I had 2 versions. Version A was the one she expected, a brilliant, cohesive strategy that would have made her a legend. Version B was different. Version B looked exactly like version A for the first 20 slides. But slide 21 was a trigger. It was a macro-embedded file that, once opened, would bypass the presentation software and open a direct link to the library. It wouldn't just show the slides, it would show the metadata of the slides. It would show the last modified by history, the deleted comments where she had written, "Make this sound like I thought of it," and the hidden spreadsheets showing her personal expenses. I uploaded version B to her private folder and labeled it final_decade_strategy_E_Vance_ownership. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my darkened living room, watching the remote access logs on my second monitor. At 11:30 p.m., I saw her log in. I saw her open the file. I watched as her cursor moved over the slides. She didn't check the macros. She didn't check the links. She just changed the title slide from Strategic Vision to the Vance Vision and saved it. She was so blinded by her own reflection that she didn't even notice the trapdoor I had built into the very first page. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. This was the point of no return. If I had been the person she thought I was, the sensitive, quiet girl, I might have called her. I might have warned her. I might have tried to negotiate. But I remembered the Miller campaign. I remembered the Lakeside project. I remembered the way she laughed in the break room while I was falling apart. I realized that people like Evelyn don't change because they are asked nicely. They only change when the cost of their behavior becomes higher than the benefit. I was about to make her behavior very, very expensive. On Friday morning, I dressed in my best suit, a sharp, charcoal gray number that I usually saved for client pitches I was actually allowed to attend. I didn't go to my desk. I went straight to the boardroom floor and waited in the shadows of the hallway. I watched the board members file in, the CEO, the CFO, the heavy hitters. And finally, I watched Evelyn walk in, carrying her laptop like a trophy, her head held high, radiating the unearned confidence of a thief who thinks they've found a way to steal the sun. The boardroom doors closed, but I had already installed a remote viewing app on the room's main display system weeks ago. I sat in the empty office next door, watching the feed on my tablet. Evelyn started the presentation. She was on fire, as they say. She spoke with a rehearsed passion about synergy, global footprints, and disruptive architecture. The board members were leaning in, captivated. Mr. Sterling was taking notes, nodding in rhythm with her voice. Then, she reached slide 21. And now, Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a dramatic, confidential tone, I want to show you the underlying data integrity model that makes this entire 10-year plan possible. This is the core of what I've built. She clicked the remote. The screen didn't change to a chart. Instead, the presentation software minimized. A command prompt window flickered onto the screen for a fraction of a second, and then a browser window opened, filling the 80-inch display. It was the library. The first thing that appeared was a high-definition video clip of Evelyn in my office 3 nights ago, late at night, searching through my desk drawers and taking photos of my private notebook. The room went dead silent. Evelyn's hand stayed frozen in the air. She didn't look at the screen for 3 seconds. When she finally turned around, her face went from a triumphant tan to a ghostly, sickly gray. The video ended, and a document began to scroll, a side-by-side comparison of the Avery project, showing my original time-stamped drafts on the left and her copies on the right. Then came the messages. These fossils don't know a pivot from a hole in the ground. Her own voice suddenly filled the room, an audio recording from a lunch she'd had with her friends, which I'd captured via the company's open mic policy on high-end executive laptops used for dictation. I've got Maya doing all the heavy lifting. She's a pathetic little mouse, but she's a talented mouse. Once this board seat is mine, I'll toss her out with the rest of the trash. The air in the boardroom seemed to vanish. Evelyn tried to click the remote, but I had disabled the USB ports. She scrambled for her laptop, her fingers fumbling, her face contorted in a mask of panic that I will never forget. This is a hack, she screamed, her voice cracking, losing all its silk. Mr. Sterling, I've been targeted. Someone has compromised the system. This is Maya. She's unstable. I told you she was difficult. Mr. Sterling stood up slowly. He didn't look at Evelyn. He looked at the screen, which was now displaying a clear, undeniable spreadsheet of her personal shopping trips billed to the Avery account. Evelyn, he said, his voice like a glacier, the metadata on these logs shows they were generated from your own admin credentials. And that audio, that is undeniably your voice. He turned to the head of security, who was already standing by the door. Take the laptop. And take Ms. Vance to her office to collect her personal belongings. She is to be escorted from the building immediately. Evelyn began to wail, a high, thin sound of a person whose entire reality has just collapsed. She looked around the room, searching for an ally, but every face was a wall of stone. She had spent 5 years treating everyone as a tool, and now she found that tools don't offer sympathy. As she was being led out, she saw me standing in the hallway through the glass. Our eyes met for one final second. I didn't smirk. I didn't wave. I just stood there, my hands clasped in front of me, watching her the way a scientist watches a failed experiment being cleared away. She looked at me with a hatred so pure it should have burned, but all I felt was a profound sense of relief. The engine had finally stopped, and for the first time in my life, I was the one holding the keys. The fallout was swift and total. The company's legal team spent the next 72 hours going through every file I provided. They found even more than I had documented, years of systematic credit theft and minor embezzlement that had gone unnoticed because no one had ever bothered to look behind the curtain she'd built. Evelyn was not only fired, the company filed a civil suit to recover the misappropriated funds and the bonuses she had received based on stolen work. Her reputation in the industry didn't just suffer, it vanished. In a world built on networking, being exposed as a parasite is a death sentence. I didn't get promoted immediately. The company had to go through a massive internal audit, and for a few months, things were chaotic. But the atmosphere changed. The toxic fog that had hung over the department for years began to lift. People started talking to each other again. We started having meetings where ideas were actually discussed, rather than just handed over to a queen bee. Eventually, I was offered the position of director of strategy, the role Evelyn had been blocking me from for years. But I didn't take it. I realized that I didn't want to be the engine for that firm anymore, even if the driver was gone. I used the settlement and my now cleared reputation to start my own consultancy. I took the Avery account with me. The client had insisted on it after learning the truth. My life is different now. I don't have migraines. I don't sit in my car and breathe. I work with people I trust, and I make sure that every engine in my company knows exactly where the destination is, and that they're the ones who get the credit for getting us there. I learned that silence isn't a weakness, it's a reservoir. And if you wait long enough and prepare well enough, that reservoir can become a flood. Looking back, I realized that the most important lesson wasn't about data or documentation. It was about boundaries. I let Evelyn treat me that way for years because I thought I had no choice. I thought that being professional meant being a doormat. I was wrong. Professionalism is about the work, yes, but it's also about the integrity of the environment where that work happens. If you find yourself in a situation where your silence is being used against you, remember that you are the one who controls the narrative of your own life. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't have to be aggressive to be effective. Sometimes, The most devastating thing you can do to a person who thrives on chaos is to provide them with the one thing they can't manipulate, the truth. Evelyn thought she was playing a game of chess while I was playing a game of checkers. She didn't realize that I had redesigned the board. To anyone listening who feels like they're trapped in the shadows of a toxic boss, start documenting. Start observing. Don't let your anger burn out. Let it refine your focus. The truth has a way of coming out, but it helps if you're the one holding the flashlight. Your work is yours. Your time is yours. Your dignity is yours. Don't ever let someone else put their name on it. Thank you for listening to my journey. It wasn't an easy path, but it was the necessary one. Where are you listening from? Let me know in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and like the video. It helps us bring more of these experiences to light. Until next time, keep your head up and your files backed up. #####.